Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Emma, dear Markus, thank you very much for having invited me today to your birthday. So let me start by congratulating and wishing happy birthday to 60 years old Business Europe. Business Europe has been in the front row to experience and sense the changes in the world during your existence. So business is always in the front row, see the changes or creating the changes. Business Europe's role has always been to translate this obvious change or obvious opportunities to the language which policymakers, both in national but also in the European level, should understand. So this has been your role, and it's supposed to be in your role also in the future, because change of the world has not stopped. It will never stop. And for many reasons, business sector is always the first one to see the change, or at the same time see the opportunities, what the change can bring to the societies. I also want to thank Business Europe for excellent and very close cooperation. I say this in my personal capacity, but also on behalf of the European Commission. Business Europe is one of those regular, well-established counterparts or collaborator partner for the European Commission in various files. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe is back. The crisis is behind us, and the crisis made us stronger. We have learned from the mistakes, and we have learned our lesson. Europe is structurally stronger now than what it was before the economic and financial crisis. Many structures have been changed, many weak spots and weaknesses have been corrected, and some which have not yet been corrected are under the process. Still, it doesn't mean that everything is perfect. Far from it. Good economic time usually means that it's a perfect timing to fix the roof for the bad days. In concrete terms, it means that our member states has to keep going in the reform path. Not for the sake of reforms themselves, but because the world around us has changed and will change also in the future. So that's why structural reforms shouldn't be seen as a swear word, as a negative thing which always is away from somebody. But our societies must be reformed also in the future, just like they have been reformed over the last decades and centuries. One way to look at the future is to look at the future of European industry. We have just established a new industrial roundtable in which Emma and Sauri are members. There are 20 people representing different countries and different industries, new and small industries, but also more established, more mature industries. The job of the roundtable is to create a long-term vision for next Commission. So the idea is to identify key areas where changes are needed, both in European level but also in the national level. The idea is to collect together knowledge and know-how from different sectors of different fields of industry to sense the obvious changes and also to identify the structures which are needed in order to improve our industry's competitiveness. Existing industries' competitiveness, but also new industries' competitiveness. Let me mention 3 challenges which we must uptake together. First, preserving our fundamental values. Second, standing up for open, fair and rules-based trade. And third, embracing technological change while making our economy more circular. Let me start by saying a few words on fundamental values. Values cannot be seen as something above everyday life, something which is only mentioned in anniversaries of organizations, in the speeches like this one. I'm sure everybody in this room knows that if fundamental rights are not respected, everything is creational. You cannot trust on anything. And I must admit that today's Europe is not perfect in that sense. We have issues to be solved in many of our member states regarding the rule of law, regarding the judicial systems, regarding corruption and freedom of media. Many of us thought already a few years ago that this kind of issues belongs to the problems of the past. But unfortunately, this is not the case. In order to create competitive Europe, in order to create predictability, we need to keep these fundamental issues in good shape. And this is one issue where I sincerely ask your help. I want to see European business be vocal and loud, advocating fundamental values and rights. I do hope that you do your job in your own country, but also in the European level. I do hope that you would be vocally advocating in favor of principles and fundamental values. It's important for your workers, it's important for your investment decisions. I'm sure everybody here can make a difference between the countries where rule of law is implemented strictly and those where there are issues with this issue. So, as I said, values shouldn't be seen only as a nice thing to mention in anniversaries. That's why I want to openly and sincerely ask your help to stand for, vocally and openly stand for fundamental values in Europe. Let me then turn to the trade issues. Once the values are very important here in Europe, we must make the same effort also globally. We must firmly stand for an open, fair and rules-based world order. This is particularly important these times when some are tempted to return to the protectionist policies and unilateral actions. Our ambitious trade agenda serves this purpose. With our trade agreements, we open new markets but also promote high standards and values with like-minded partners, such as the fight against climate change or rule of law and human rights. The implementation of our agreements with Canada and Japan and the finalization of negotiations with Mercosur and Mexico are therefore top priorities for this Commission. The Commission also supports the WTO and its dispute settlement as a pillar of rules-based multilateral order. And we support work to improve international rules, such as the one of the OECD fight tax avoidance. Making sure that globalization is fair is indeed essential to maintain citizens' support for it. If we fail to do so, they will turn their back and vote accordingly. This is why we must also defend EU industry and workers efficiently against unfair trade. We have successfully used last year and strengthened our trade defense instruments to protect our steel industry from dumping and overcapacity. We have proposed an EU foreign investment screening mechanism to increase transparency on risks of foreign takeovers of strategic assets. We will also not hesitate to act if countries introduce unilateral restrictive measures, while at the same time doing our utmost to avert a trade war. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now talk about two mega trends that deeply transform our economies and societies, and that I think we must embrace and shape: artificial intelligence and circular economy. Let's first speak about digitalization and artificial intelligence. They transform everything: the way we communicate, the way we move, the way we shop, or the way we inform ourselves and think. By doing so, they disrupt the world we know. Even if such disruption can sometimes be painful, I think we have no choice than embracing this chance, because it also brings decisive improvements. Of course, regulators must also act to mitigate negative impacts and risks by technological change. And we must all help those that need it most to adapt and make the transition. US and China are ahead of us in the field of digital and AI. It is essential that Europe becomes also a leader in this field. So, what shall we do? Well, you, the businesses, are the main actors and drivers of change. Your investment in research, your efforts to adapt your businesses to AI, your search for new skills, your innovations are what will enable Europe to make the leap forward. And so are all the startups that are maybe too small to have joined Business Europe yet. But I hope some will scale up and then join to your organization. Governments have, of course, also their role to play. Investing in high-quality education to keep our people with the right skills is a top priority. We must also continue to support research and innovation. The share of robotics and artificial intelligence in Horizon 2020 is one of the world's largest civilian research programs, with a total budget of 700 million euros, leveraging an additional 2.1 billion euros from the industry. We can be proud of this, even if more must be done to catch up with the US and China that invest even larger amounts. As regulators, we will have to carefully choose what to regulate and what not to regulate to create an enabling framework and keep learning and adapt as much as business and people do. Careful balance between data protection and data flows must, for instance, be established so that citizens' privacy is preserved, but that companies can also actually exploit data to develop products and services based on AI. We must also strengthen the EU single market, in particular the digital single market, so as to facilitate economies of scale and the embrace of big European digital champions. Of course, with all this transformation, lots of jobs might be automated and lost. The net impact on jobs is not yet clear. High-skilled jobs will also be created if the EU becomes a strong technology maker, which is why it is so important to help everybody make the transition. Finally, let me end by mentioning another megatrend that I'm passionate about. It's a circular economy. This is an area where the EU is world leader already now. The goal is preserving our planet. The goal of preserving our planet cannot be contrary to the logic of market economy. By being more efficient and setting the right regulatory framework, we can create right incentives to turn our economy circular and help our businesses be amongst the most competitive in the world. Our recent plastic strategy or our eco-certification scheme are good examples of how to do so. So, ladies and gentlemen, the world is changing and the change is fascinating. There are many things to achieve through the changes. But the main thing is to keep Europe competitive and ahead of the curve, and not only to adapt to the changes the others are doing. Thank you very much.
We're going to keep you on stage. And if I could invite Marcus to join us on stage. Marcus, please. You're going to join the panel. We haven't got much time. I'm going to monopolize the conversation unless I'm told by Sinna that I should open it up to the audience, but I'm going to be very selfish for the moment. We only have a few minutes. So I'll talk to you, turn to you, Marcus. You heard, this is a very apt comment you made, Jyrki, in your speech, since the conference is all about the value of business, the values of business. You heard him, Marcus, Jyrki, make a very bold, very direct, very heartfelt plea to business, speak up more for fundamental values. There's clearly a subtext there. We didn't go into detail. We all know maybe what Jyrki's talking about. So the question to you is, this is a direct, it's not a challenge, it's an invitation, it's a plea, but how do you think business can respond to that, such an invitation from Jyrki?
Well, I think first by leading by example. And I think we've seen, and Emma said it in her opening speech, this is about commitment and this is about responsibility. And then Henrike has also underlined it. And I think there's a big difference between, you know, the biggest scandals we had it, the companies which had the biggest telephone books of all kind of corporate rules. And I think it's about having simple rules which everybody considers as being right, and then to simply apply them, to live up to these rules, and to inflict trust, what has also been said in I think 2 of the panels.
Right. So well, maybe to press you a tiny bit, Jyrki, because it's very tantalizing what you were saying. I mean, you said that the businesses, could you please be more vocal in making the case for fundamental values? What do you actually mean in practice, from your point of view?
I mean in practice that sometimes when we have issues with some countries on fundamental values, it's seen as a battle between faceless bureaucrats in Brussels and citizens of country concerned. And this is not only a political issue. This is an issue of fundamental rights and opportunities. The way our market is operating. If we are leaning towards unclear territory where everything is discretional, judiciary is under the political leadership, or if there's a public tender, you cannot trust that you are treated fairly and equally. It's not only kind of academic political discussion. So that's why we have already now enough examples, worrisome enough examples. I don't want to exaggerate, but there are enough examples which should alarm the bells. So in concrete terms, what Business Europe member organizations and individual companies could do is just to speak this kind of stuff publicly, even without pinpointing some country, or if this is the case, you can say directly to the authorities that now we are in the wrong path. So, for instance, if comparing these rule of law issues to current Brexit negotiations, I think Brexit is much less problematic than potential rule of law problems, because at the end of the day we'll make a compromise with UK. It's some sort of a compromise decision between EU and UK, but you cannot compromise on rule of law or fundamental values. So that's why it's a competitiveness issue, it's a fundamental right issue.
Right, okay. Okay, quickly, but I want to make sure, yeah?
Maybe to add what I said before. I think you have all seen we've published this Declaration of Values. And this comes out of a debate we had with our members. And it's a mix of values we found in the constituencies of our members, but also in companies.
Right.
And this is a commitment. I mean, this is a commitment that obviously, as Emma was saying, where human beings are acting, mistakes can happen. But the aim is to do better, and this declaration is meant to be translated into action by the whole community, and this is how it is meant.
Thank you, Marcus. Before I ask my next question, are there anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question to the panel, to Jyrki or to Marcus, before I just carry on? That way I'll feel less guilty about my not use. So yes, if you would mind, yes, there's obviously a roving microphone somewhere. Joe, could you find a mic? Yeah. And maybe you could stand, give your name and your affiliation, and then ask your question. That would be great. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. Hans van der Borchert from Political Europe. Question to the Vice President Katainen. You talked about the importance of free trade and of being open and fighting protectionism. Well, we could see as soon as today steel tariffs imposed by US President Donald Trump. How concerned are you actually about this, also in the sense of broader cooperation with the United States on various of issues like China, etc.? And how do you think we should react to this? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jyrki?
I try to be as concrete as possible. If US takes unilateral action which violates the principles of our bilateral trade or puts our companies to unfortunate situation, first of all, we have to analyze the proposal or the decision in very short time period, meaning we are counting days or hours. Then we have to react. We have to take appropriate reaction against this kind of measures. I don't know what to expect from this, but nevertheless we have to protect our own values, which are based on free trade. But looking at the entire situation, I easily can see very unfortunate and worrisome development ahead of us. If US is taking unilateral actions, we have to respond, but it's not only problem between Europe and the United States, because it has an impact to the steel production, steel market elsewhere too. What is the reaction? Where steel is going from Asian countries? Obviously to Europe. They cannot sell it to America. So we can end up easily to the situation where we are in the trade war with the two fronts. And only because of one decision made by the President of the United States. So we have done lots of effort to avoid the situation, and let's hope that some light will come to the White House in that sense, so that we could avoid a global trade war. Because what can, I mean, it is very simple to see the scenario. So the problem is that I don't know how to stop the war if it starts. It's easier to avoid the war than stop the war.
Well, let's stop the war being declared. Okay, there's a gentleman at the back also. I think you're not the same person, no. You're so far away, I can't see.
Hi here.
It's you again, okay.
Jorge Valero, Euractiv.
Right.
Just a quick question following what you just said before, that something like Brexit is less problematic than the issue of rule of law. I mean, we all know what country has an issue with the rule of law, which is Poland. So that means that Poland represents a bigger threat to the EU that the UK leaving the EU.
That's a nice, easy question for you. Okay.
Yeah. What I meant, thanks for asking this, what I meant that there's Poland, but also we have seen some worrisome signals in the other countries, which are not necessarily exactly the same what has happened in Poland, but there are some signals which have put the functioning of the principal rules in question in those countries. And why I said that this development is more worrisome than a Brexit is that if this becomes mainstream, if it becomes partially accepted that you can undermine the fundamental values, just the changing little things there, here and there.
Incrementally, yeah.
And I would like to include the freedom of press or the security of journalists to the same basket, because they all are related. So I don't mean that Poland alone means everything, but I'm more worried about the trend. And we cannot lose the basic setup of Europe, which is based on fundamental values.
Okay.
Paul?
You, sir, yeah.
Paul.
Yeah, sorry, Marcus.
I mean, there's also the business side to it. I mean, Business Europe normally doesn't speak up on politics.
Yeah.
But in this case, we had a very clear statement saying that if the rule of law, if judicial systems and all these things are put in question, this has a direct impact on investment and therefore also on the economy. So on this we have been pretty clear.
Thank you very much. I'm just beckoning to the lady who has a microphone to give it to Christian. And announce yourself, sir. I know who you are, but maybe not everybody else in the room does.
Thank you. I'm Christian Verschuren from Eurocommerce, which representing retail and wholesalers. And I really wanted to respond to your call, Mr. Katainen, on actually the businesses being a little bit more vocal on the fundamental values. In fact, Mr. Timmermans said this to our CEOs 2 days ago as well, because I think if you have indeed judges that are responding to the calls, to the politicians, etc., and don't have the predictability, it's the whole single market that falls apart. And I think I've had these discussions with Marcus a number of times, and maybe it's somewhat more difficult for Business Europe and its national members association to challenge some of the governments. We have done with challenges and filed quite a number on behalf of our companies of infringement cases that, particularly of course in Central and Eastern Europe, a number have faced very fundamental discrimination about their businesses, and I think that we certainly stand there, as you know. I think I'm denouncing actually fundamental single market barriers that have really prevented a number of businesses to provide the benefits to consumers in those geographies. So I think certainly music to our ears, and I think to colleagues also in Business Europe, I think to try to continue to highlight the importance of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. If any more questions, I have one final question for the panel. Anybody else before I over-monopolize? Okay, let me ask a slightly provocative question. I've been here in this town, as you know, for many, many decades, and I've seen a number, all respect, don't take it personally, Jyrki, of industry roundtables convened by a senior commissioner, such as yourself. What can you do, and what can the people in the group, like Emma and others, do to make this not just another commission roundtable, but it's industrialists? Give the slightly provocative question. Marcus has to answer that as well.
What I'm expecting from this roundtable is to set the priorities, or first to collect obvious trends, but also weak signals, because the business sector is very very good to sense the weakness signals. What will reshape the competitiveness? What will reshape the production or trading? So first we try to collect together this kind of set of information. Second, what I'm expecting is to find priorities. What should be done in the European level in order to enable new trends to flourish in Europe? For instance, if we want to be as competitive or even more competitive than China and US are in the artificial intelligence, what does it mean in political terms? What kind of investments should be done by public authorities? What kind of regulatory changes we should do in order to create more competitive regulatory environment? And what, at the same time, what we should avoid to do by accident, because sometimes policymakers in good faith may regulate something which kills a good idea. We have worked in this same spirit in the fields of circular economy, and it seems to function very well. But there are other areas also which we want to identify, and my sincere wish is that the work the Roundtable is doing could contribute to the priorities of next Commission.
Oh, okay, thank you. Marcus, final word to you, Marcus.
Yeah, well, first, I mean, we're very grateful for the Roundtable. We think this is a good instrument. Second, of course, what Jyrki just mentioned, it's very important that there is a body which carries on the fire to the next Commission. So this is a value in itself. Third, of course, there's a number of long-term things the Roundtable will have to deal with, like what is our long-term vision for European industry, right, and how do we measure it. But, and I'll add one thing, and Jyrki knows it, we think it also needs to have a concrete impact on short-term policy making. I'll bring you one example. The thing we see most urgently at the time being is the construction of the FP9, the 9th framework program to follow up Horizon 2020. We've seen in the film, I mean, of course, Japan and the US are far ahead. What we didn't have in the film, because you can contest the figures we get is that also China has overtaken us. So we need to do more. So we think that this roundtable should also give advice on how this framework program should be structured, because there is concerns. I mean, there is rumors that the industrial leadership pillar might be merged with the societal challenges, and so on and so on. This must not mean that it goes to the wrong direction, but the doubt is there. So it means we need to have a very clear opinion on how the construction of this FP9 must happen and how many money we need for industry projects in order to build our future.
Okay. Well, we have to leave it there, run out of time, because lunch beckons, I think, outside. So could I give you one final task? Ask you please to give a big round of applause both to Jyrki Katainen and to Markus Beirer. Thank you, Jyrki.